Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into the Animals Without a Backbone video part 4. This is a big lecture because there's just a lot of different animals to cover here. As I mentioned, invertebrates, 97% of the animal world. So there's a whole lot of stuff here. But we're keeping it brief. We're keeping it kind of the highlights, the main phylum, the key features. So none of it's getting real in-depth here. So in the earlier lectures, we talked about different animals, features of animals, and then we're working our way through the various phylum, talking about key characteristics at the phylum levels, and then a couple of them at the class level. So our next phylum is a fun, really fun phylum to play with in the marine ecosystem. This is phylum Mollusca. These are all the mollusks. Now mollusks are incredibly important in the marine ecosystem, not just for the ecosystem, but for humans as well. I mean, economically, they're a big player in the marine ecosystem, and communities that use the marine ecosystem for source of revenue. So we're going to take a look at how do you identify an animal as a mollusk. We'll look at the basic body. The basic body is a soft, squishy body. It has this big muscular foot attached to it, and I'll show you some pictures in a little bit here. There is a structure called the visceral mass that contains the organs of the mollusk. Now, their body is covered by a structure called the mantle. And the mantle in most mollusks, I'm not going to say every one of them, but in most mollusks, the mantle secretes a shell. So down here we have our queen conch. And queen conchs are beautiful snails in the marine ecosystem. This shell here, the shell structure, this pink, kind of orangish pink yellow shell, that is secreted by the mantle. And you can see down here, it's got two eyes looking out at us, peeking out to see is it safe to come out of its shell. But that shell is a secretion of calcium carbonate from the mantle structure in the body of the mollusk. And the vast majority, not all, there's actually one group that does not have this, but the vast majority of mollusks have a structure called radula. This is their feeding apparatus. Pretty cool little apparatus. When we talk about different mollusks, we'll talk about the radula and how it works. And then the mollusks use gills for gas exchange. Okay, so these are our big basic features and characteristics of the marine mollusks. Something to mention, these guys have the greatest, or mollusks make up the greatest animal diversity in the ocean. So when you look at animals in the ocean, there are more mollusks represented in the animal world than any other phylum out there. On land, different story. But mollusks dominate the ocean when we talk about diversity. So some really cool mollusks that we're going to see, we're going to play with, we're going to explore. There are some that are deadly, but by and large, most of these are just a lot of fun to play with. Because there's so much diversity here, we're going to break these down into classes. There's going to be 4 classes of mollusks that we're going to look at. So the first class, Gastropoda. These are known as the gastropods. This is actually the biggest group of mollusks out there. These are your snails and a group called the sea slugs. All right. Now, the main feature for the gastropods is that they have a coiled shell on top of their body. For most of the mollusks, sea slugs, they've lost the shell. But think about snails. So that big queen conch we looked at, and all these other snails have this big coiled shell on top of their body. As I mentioned, the shell is absent in some, the sea slugs, or the other term for sea slugs is called the nudibranchs. They don't have that shell. The gastropods will use a radula for feeding. Now they're scraping and clawing and kind of scraping, chewing, and eating away at algae. So that makes these guys herbivores if they're eating algae. Now what's crazy is some of these mollusks use the radula to drill into shells. Let me move this. The radula is actually almost looks like a little drill bit. They drill into shells of other mollusks, so now those guys are carnivores. Some of them will use or have a modified radula that will harpoon fish. So obviously these guys go into the carnivore group as well. So we have a lot of just diversity and variety within the gastropods. I mean, in mollusks in general, but especially in the gastropods. But again, keep in mind key features. Let me blow this image up briefly. Key features about their body plan. Here's that big muscular foot. Here's the visceral mass that contains all their structures. Their stomach, digestive system, the gonads, etc. This thin little line here is the mantle. And that structure right there is what secretes the calcium carbonate to form the shell. Shell is a hard structure, calcium structure, very durable, tough, resilient form of protection. And a weird thing about gastropods, let me put this up. Here's one more feature I want you to make sure you guys remember, is this thing called torsion. When their body is developing, the body develops in a twisted fashion, what this means is during development, make sure I spell fashion right, it twists and rotates. This is what places the anus above the head in, try to get that back there, in the gastropods. So it develops and it turns and twists in this coiled pattern, and that's why you see, here's the anus, positioned right up there above where the head is. Okay, so some neat features, some really fun stuff when we look at marine mollusks and especially at the gastropods. So that's one of the classes in the mollusk or mollusca phylum. Second class are the bivalves. This is a very important group to humans commercially, economically. Clams, oysters, scallops, mussels, class Bivalvia. All these guys are filter feeders. Now, to identify them, look for this flattened, compressed body between two shells. The shells are on hinges, and those hinges are closed within a set of muscles called the adductor muscles. All of the bivalves are filter feeders. So anything in the water is going to go through them as they filter out particles of food. They strain it out. So filter feeding is really good. There's an in-current siphon and an ex-current siphon. So we'll see water going in this way. Goes through everything here. They filter it out, turn it around, and push it out that way. Now, some of the bivalves can actually squirt out water like a little jet propulsion and move themselves around. So it gives them a little bit of mobility, but in general, most of these bivalves are pretty stationary. They don't move a whole lot. Mostly sessile. Okay. But with the filtering aspect, this makes them subjective to problems when there are issues in the water. So if there's a dinoflagellate explosion and you have a red tide event, pollutants or toxins, then that can get associated into the body tissue of the bivalves. And we come along and go, oh, I want clams or I want scallops in my fettuccine. And if those came from an environment where the water is polluted, there's toxins, there's chemicals, things like that in the water, that gets incorporated into the body tissue of the bivalve. we then eat it, it can lead to problems in us. So we have to be very careful. These guys can be looked at as little indicators of marine health. So if you took a bivalve, you could actually do different chemical analysis on the body of it to decide or determine, is it picking up pesticides and pollutants and chemicals and things like that. So when we have oil spills in the ocean, these guys suffer because they pull that oil into their body, incorporate it into their tissue. A lot of times it kills them. If they don't die, now you have this bivalve that has toxin in it. Who's going to buy that for dinner? Okay. Pearls. Mention that. So they produce a shell, this calcium carbonate shell, that is secreted by the mantle. And what will happen is, if something gets lodged underneath the shell, between the mantle and the shell, they secrete more calcium on top of it to decrease the irritation. Kind of like a callus on your foot if you have a bad pair of shoes. And that, let's just call it the callus, builds up, builds up, builds up, and that will continue to grow and develop. And this is where our pearls come from. Now, any of the gastropods can produce a pearl. We'll see quincunx producing pearls. If they produce a shell, you can get a pearl. The other groups, though, we haven't found a way to market quincunx pearls as much as we do oyster pearls. So, all right, so some neat stuff with bivalves. Odds are we're going to be eating these at some point when we are associating with the marine ecosystem. So, okay, now probably the most interesting and exciting class of mollusks, the cephalopods, cephalopoda or the cephalopods. Squids, octopuses, cuttlefish, chambered nautilus, all these guys are active marine predators. Some awesome guys, awesome species and representatives in this group. They have an incredibly well-developed nervous system. They have a brain. They actually have the largest brain-to-body ratio in all of the invertebrates. Incredibly smart. Complex eyes. They have again, well-developed sensory structures, and they have a closed circulatory system, meaning highly active animals. The mantle on them is not a hard shell, but what it's evolved into is this thick, kind of leather-like structure that covers their body. So it gives them some protection, but they still do have somewhat of a soft, squishy body. They're not rigid and hard like the bivalves or the gastropods. The radula, move that down, is beak-like. And it enables them to rip and tear flesh. Some of them will actually crush their prey depending upon how their radula and their mouth structures have evolved. But what's fun, squid, they have 10 tentacles. All right, so if you're looking at a squid and you're going, wow, is that a squid or an octopus? Count the tentacles. Squid have 10. They have 2 elongated ones, one there, the other one's kind of folded back here, and then they'll have 8 shorter ones. The 2 long ones are their touchers or feelers, and then they decide they like it, they wrap around it, they shoot out the other 8, they grab the prey, and they pull it back into the mouth, and then you have this big chomping jaw structure. It's scary. It looks like a bird's beak. I mean, this sucker is completely evolved for shredding and ripping up food. So you take this poor little fish, that gets pushed into that, and when that top part of the jaw comes down, it shreds its head off, and the rest gets pushed into the mouth for feeding. So in the next lecture, I don't want to shorten the octopus's glory. I'll talk about octopus in the next lecture.